me.
All right, so I'm back with Fernando.
You were recording that? No, you weren't. Okay.
Fernando Raul Castro Astrology. And we're going to be following up with our previous conversation. We had talked about Rahu and Ketu and the development of Rahu and Ketu through time and all kinds of different things. And astrology is a holy science. So if you want to refer to that, you can go back to the previous video on this channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. But one other little topic we wanted to discuss was this idea of Vargas. And currently, I'm finishing teaching up a course on Vargas for the astrology apprenticeship, the Vedic astrology apprenticeship course through Asheville Vedic Astrology. And in that course of study, we've tried to look at what does Brihadarashara Shastra have to say? What kind of things can we pull from Sarvarta Chintamani and so on? And Fernando here, he's gone through that course. He's also done a lot of interesting study into the Vargas himself. So we then got on the topic of, well, what do we really know about Vargas? How do people really teach Vargas? And you were telling me, Fernando, that you've been studying from different angles, and that for example, you've at least had people teach you three different ways of looking at Vargas. Were those three completely different ways of looking at Vargas? What was your experience?
Well, first of all, hi, and thank you for bringing me back. I've learned Vargas from three different people from technically kind of two different schools, and you're the third one. And the reality of things, and students and neophytes should kind of be aware of this, that the application of Vargas is something very recent in Vedic astrology. It's something that started probably in the mid-20th century, specifically with the writings of V.V. Raman, and afterwards with K.N. Rao, and also the Harmonic Charts, which came before that. I don't remember his full name, but the idea is that Vargas is something that is used and interpreted differently depending on the school of astrology that you come from. And you're going to see that. So, and this is something that is very common in astrology. There are very many different ways of interpreting. And when you see somebody talk about Vargas in one way, and another person talking about Vargas in another way, it doesn't mean that one is right and another is wrong. The thing is that there are different perspectives in order to study them. And students have this idea, for example, the common conception. Do we use yogas in Vargas? Do we use aspects in Vargas? Well, the real answer to that is that nobody really knows. I wouldn't use aspects in Vargas. I wouldn't use yogas in Vargas. But you're going to see people who use them.
Well, why? I know why, but you tell me. Why wouldn't you use yogas or aspects in Vargas?
Because there are just symbolic representations of the subdivisions of the first chart.
Right.
You see the Rashi chart. That's the photograph of the planets in space. And then you take that chart in the two-dimensional representation of that three-dimensional reality, and then you subdivide it, right? But then, there comes a lot of technical things that we haven't discussed. Ayanamshas. There are two different ways of dividing the Hora. I know at least three different ways of dividing the Drekana.
Right.
And then you subdivide it, and then you have a representation, right? And people have to take into consideration that, what we know of Vargas basically comes from chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Brihadarashara Hora Shastra. And maybe what other classics say upon that.
Right.
And you read those chapters and you only see the directions, how to divide the signs. You see the idea of Bimshopaka, which we can discuss what it is. And, the basic uses of the Vargas, which are just sometimes a sentence or two words.
Right.
And that's it. And everything else that has been created upon Vargas are just modern interpretations that come from the 20th century onwards. And Vargas, people have to realize, is something secondary and not something primary in many things. And you have to take into consideration that the only thing that we might not consider secondary is the idea of dignity. and how Vargas, take the dignity from subdivision to subdivision. But beyond that, it's just conjecture, and it's just your idea of what works and what doesn't work.
Right, and you make a good point that a lot of the information that we have, coming from Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, that it essentially tells you how to calculate the Vargas, and then it may say things like Drekana for co-borns, and that's it.
Yep.
Right? But then we have other texts like Sarvarta Chintamani, where we have things like considering the fourth lord, and there'll be statements in Sarvarta Chintamani where it says, let's see, if the lord of the fourth is in 4 or more good Vargas. So in Sarvarta Chintamani, it doesn't go into detail about all these things, but then it jumps out and it'll say, if the lord of the 4th house from the Rashi chart is together with the lord of the 10th house and well placed in a particular Varga, or if the lord of the 4th house is in 4 or more good Vargas and aspected by the moon in the Navamsha, that this gives you insights into how to use the Vargas, but that's not something that you necessarily get from Brihat Parashara or Shastra. So when someone says, "Oh, everything you need to know about the Vargas is in Brihat Parashara or Shastra," it kind of indicates that they might not have read Brihat Parashara or Shastra.
And there's also a controversy with the chronology of books. Mm-hmm. Some people might say that Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra came after Charvana Sintamani or others, because there's not a clear indication of when Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra was written. Some people say 7th or 8th century, but people say it's older, but it wasn't really recompiled until the 19th century. So, there's a lot of questions in terms of the classics of their chronology and what came first, what came afterwards. But, people have to take into consideration this idea that Vargas are taught in different ways. Mm-hmm. The thing is that the majority of Vedic astrologers only study with one person. Since I have Jupiter in Capricorn in my Navamsha, and I have Jupiter in Capricorn in my sidereal chart, I've studied with different people, and studying with different people, you realize, holy crap, everybody teaches everything differently.
Right.
And it's not necessarily this idea of doing tropical astrology with Vedic concepts. No, it's not that. It's that, siderealists, there are different schools. Mm-hmm. Tropical, there are different schools also. And you start realizing, wow, this is why people talk so much about gurus. Right. How important they are. Mm-hmm. And that's why you shouldn't mix gurus, because then you get people like myself who are going to cause havoc or cause these types of videos where you're gonna be divulging things that some people just don't want to talk about, which is we don't know a lot about Vargas from a really scientific from a really hardcore perspective.
The interesting thing, though, that you bring up, talking about Jupiter and Capricorn, so that's where Jupiter is debilitated.
Yeah.
And you're talking about studying with different teachers, and true, when we see Jupiter and Capricorn, sometimes that can give that, which is the reason it's problematic, is because it can tend to give confusion about a way to approach something. And although what you've just illustrated is the interesting bit, that Jupiter and Capricorn, if one is paying attention, that they can actually learn the reason why. They can learn how to strengthen Jupiter and Capricorn by understanding why it is important, say, to follow that idea of studying one path and sticking to one path. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that it's wonderful that you pointed that out.
That's very true.
Yeah. Many people, I've actually Googled, I used Kala to search for Jupiter and Capricorn to see how many people have Jupiter and Capricorn, what kind of charts are they. And there are plenty of successful people with Jupiter and Capricorn. And again, I think that for them, probably what made them so successful is what you're talking about, the ability to step back and observe why certain truths might be there. And with what you mentioned about Vargas, all the different directions of Vargas, I don't remember if we discussed this in this talk or in a previous talk, but you mentioned that in astrology, there can come a time as a person ages and as they do their spiritual practice, that certain nadis are cleared or certain connections are cleared.
The Jyotirvidya, yeah.
Yeah, such that they're not able, or they don't need to necessarily look at a chart. Well, if someone has a pure enough intention and motivation, and they have a sense that they're dedicating their life to helping people by studying a particular kind of science or way of knowing, such as Vedic astrology, even if they're studying a completely twisted version of Vedic astrology or any kind of astrology, if their intention is pure and that's all they have, if they commit to it, then their consciousness will allow them to untangle and figure out the right information from that, which is why there are so many good astrologers out there that I meet, and I hear how they do it, and I'm like, my God, that is the most ridiculous, confusing thing I've ever heard. How can you even have clients? But it's because they are sincere and they are devoted, and because of that, that is what allows that ability to work with their clients and to share good information. That's why it comes through, So I think what you just mentioned is very important, that there are multiple ways of looking at things. Now, of course, there's the right way, there's the wrong way, and then there's my way, and I think my way is the best way, but, everyone can say that.
And as long as you don't like it, you can take the highway. Exactly.
Yeah. And as long as I really have this feeling that it comes down to the sense of devotion and pure intention to share accurate information. And if you've got that, you can throw rocks, or you can read tea leaves, or you can, have a fish tank and note the status of your fish when someone asks you a question, and then that can give you insights. The same can be true if people are learning 30 different ways to use Vargas, so.
Totally agree. It's the predisposition that you have, and that's why sometimes you can give a reading with a wrong chart and it works.
Exactly.
And if you have the pure intent of doing a good job and helping the other person, everything will work out. And when you do readings, it doesn't matter if you use Vargas or if you don't use Vargas. What I've noticed is that higher powers take control sometimes. And I don't mean that I channel things. What I mean is that things happen that just have to happen and things work out.
Right.
But the idea is that Vargas are something new. Mm-hmm. That at the same time have been used thanks to computing, which is something that we have to take into consideration. Let's be honest, a lot of modern astrologers today would not have sat down and do all of the calculations by hand. They use Vargas mainly because they have computers, and they have facilitated the idea of computing all these difficult calculations that would have taken, I don't know, a whole day to do. You can do it literally in 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. And and another thing is that Vargas should be used secondarily to the Rashi chart.
Right.
As you've taught us, the Rashi chart is the principal significator, and then Vargas helped that significator express itself. It's just complementary to the D1 chart.
Right.
But just remember, if you see a YouTube video where it says something about Vargas and you see another video where it says something else about Vargas, that doesn't mean that one is right and another is wrong. It's that there are different approaches to them, and that's it.
Yeah. Mine are still right, though. Anyway, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll conclude on that note, and watch for upcoming videos that we're going to be doing, finishing up the effects of the planets for Virgo, Jupiter, Saturn, Moon, and Sun. So again, you can find Fernando by Googling Fernando Raul Astrology, and you'll be able to speak with him and get a session with him. So thanks again, Fernando.
Thank you, Ryan. A pleasure always.
Yeah, you too.